It's Christmas and the festivities are in full gear across Africa. Now, in spite of the economic realities, many people are still making the best of the moment. In Nigeria, for instance, the government has introduced a 50% discount on road travel. Let's now discuss how, this particular day is being celebrated across the African continent. And of course, to do that, I will be joined on the program right now by Dr. Xen, Iraki Associate Professor, University of Nairobi, and of course, Maliba Arnold, a Public Policy Analyst from Kenya. Thank you so much for your time, Maliba.
Thank you.
All right. Now, of course, Dr. Iraki will join us much later in the course of the program. Now, I would like to start off with this particular question, Maliba. How are you celebrating right there in Kenya?
I stopped working yesterday, so
Okay.
I wasn't able to travel. So I'm stuck in Nairobi. When I use the word stuck, it means that a majority of Kenyans have actually traveled from Nairobi to our country. You might actually have seen reports of long queues and traffic along major highways, specifically the Nairobi to Eldoret route, or rather Nairobi Nakuru route. People have been on the road. Also, the same has actually been reported from some major roads like Mombasa, Nairobi. Of course, the city in Nairobi is deserted. Nairobi is normally bustling with life. You go around, looks deserted. There are no people around here. So I've kept it low in the city. Feels like going by the jokes in the city that the only people left in the city are thieves. Everybody else is gone home. Yeah.
Interesting. But you said you noticed long queues. And of course, at some point also, you talked about the city being, quite deserted. What do you think is responsible for the long queues?
First of all, of course, there had been economically, of course, for the last year, we've had a lot of complaints from Kenyans that the taxation, the economic situation was quite difficult. But then I saw a headline 2 days ago saying that Kenyans had defied, quote unquote, the hard economic times, and they had money to travel a country, of course, in large numbers, and in their own ways are actually trying to make merry and have that almost ritualistic December dash to the village and then coming back. Of course, it has got its origin in the Christian faith. The argument of whether 25th is the birth date of Christ or not, that is academic. But of course, the essence of what it is and how it has actually ended up affecting the rest of us in Africa, and that the whole machine that is the economy, the whole year, society, culture, and everything else, the cog comes to stand every time a major activity within the Judeo-Christian calendar is actually being marked. Christmas is not, of course, the biggest and the most important event within the church, or rather Christianity, but it's the most celebrated. The commercial end of it, of course, their end year sales. There's too much to it, and all of us over the times, of course, we have tried to ensure that a majority of the things that we do come to rhyme with this particular season, and that is how then all of us end up going. Or what came in as a matter of faith has ended up being part and parcel of our culture now. So it's almost cultural here in Kenya for a number of communities, specifically those ones in Western Kenya and the southern part of Kenya, to go home during Christmas. It's a time to be with family. It also marks unofficially the annual leave for very many, even if it's just a week or two.
Now, let's talk about the meaning of the season and also its significance to the African continent. I mean, you said something about at this time of the year, people having to have a ritualistic sort of, will I call it hobby, to travel back to the village. I think as it applies to Kenya, it also applies here, also in Nigeria, where people try to use moments like this to reconnect with home, reconnect with their roots, and also catch up with time when it comes to the family level. How significant, or what significance does this season pose to the African continent, and of course the meaning also?
First of all, every time I look at Christmas from a scholar's perspective, this for me really speaks to one thing. that we as Africans lost. Of course, there is the faith part of it. And even as practicing Christians, if you were to walk back and look at it culturally as Africans, you can then recall the words of, I think, a gentleman called Obierika speaking to Okonkwo in Things Fall Apart, where he decries that the white man has put a knife in the things that used to hold us together and that we have fallen apart. That for me was like a surrender speech for the African culture, that we were surrendering and saying that at that particular point, we are already stuck. And that is where we have been for the longest time. So as a continent, we still, specifically Sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at what happens, it looks, number one, like we work for December. Specifically, we work for the whole year, we work for 25th. Families break because probably there was no money for Christmas, there was no money for new clothes. Literally, it's like when we start off our year, and even 31st never has got so much impact the way Christmas does. So, that has affected our politics. You realize, like in this country now, there are a lot of what I call football tournaments, Christmas tournaments in the villages, everywhere else. We go out to work from January to December. We raise money, and once we have raised money, that money is spent just for December. And literally, our life has come to be defined, specifically those who are Christian persuasion. Our life, our year is defined by how well we can actually, in my language, we say how properly we can burn December, as in how much you can spend in December, the show that you can actually exhibit during December. So much has come to define who we are. And of course, it has got its ups and downs, but largely for me, it speaks to how much we have lost as a continent. We don't speak our language. We have nothing in our practice. Culturally, we don't remember anything. We are the people who cannot even name our great-grandfather, but we know the lineage of Jesus Christ to the great-great-great-grandfather. We know nothing about our tradition, but we know so much about the Jewish culture where Jesus was born. So for us as Africa, of course, we've come to accept that, but this is where we are. It speaks about a cultural loss.
Okay. I mean, I would come back to you. Let's, of course, go to Dr. Iraki right now. Dr. Iraki, thank you so much for joining in.
Hello, how are you?
All right, great. Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too. Now, my question to you will be, number one, how are you spending, or so far, how have you spent today? And what is the significance of Christmas to the African continent?
So that's an interesting question because I have spent the Christmas with my brothers and sisters. So I invited them to my house and we have been feasting. We made sure that a goat lost its life. So we have been eating some roasted maize and we have also been making merry. So to me, Christmas is time to meet your friends, your brothers, your sisters, long lost friends, and reconnect. And when I drove to the city of Nairobi this morning, I was surprised that it's business as usual. A lot of people are still working, they're doing their business. The economy has not been very good. So because of that, a lot of people don't feel there is any need to go to rest. They need to make more money because the cost of living has gone up. And a lot of people have also traveled to the countryside to go and see their friends, which is one way to bring the cost of living down. People don't want to go to the beach or to Maldives or to Dubai because they don't have the money. So the best way is you meet with your friends, with your sisters, with your brothers, with your parents, you share the cost and Christmas becomes more affordable.
So are you saying that to a very large extent, the economy has had some sort of impact on the magnitude of celebration out there?
No question about it. All celebrations are expensive, whether it is Christmas, whether it is Easter, whether it is birthday. Any celebration is about money. And because people don't have the money, then the celebration of Christmas is muted. So people are not going where they want to go. They're not eating what they want to eat. They're not meeting who they want to meet. So people have been subdued in terms of celebrating Christmas because they don't have the money. Any celebration is about the money. Unfortunately, Christmas is about a region, but there's a lot of commercial aspect in it.
Now, talking about, of course, the, well, I call it religious part, stroke cultural part. Maliba was saying something about Africans in particular not knowing so much about their family lineage, but knowing so much about the birth of Jesus Christ, even his genealogy and all of that. Some have argued that in Africa we have traded our tradition for, well, I call it the tradition or the culture of some other people, precisely the Jews, talking about Christmas right now. Do you also share that line of thought?
To some extent, but something interesting has been happening in Kenya in the last few years. I've seen a lot of revival of our traditions. You talk to a lot of young men and a lot of middle-aged men and elderly men, they know so much about our cultures. They know about how to celebrate our celebration that we used to celebrate traditionally. So people nowadays want to call themselves their traditional names. They know their clans. They know the history of their families. So it is not true that people have done away with their traditions to go after Christianity. In fact, one of the biggest problems we are having today between the Christianity and the traditional society is that the Christians are saying, why are you going back to the old traditions? Why are you making sure that boys go through the rite of passage? Why are you becoming paganistic? So there seems to be a very good movement towards people reviving their tradition in this country. Maybe my friend has not met that movement, but I know particularly in central Kenya, people are so much about their tradition. They're loving traditions again. They're giving they're giving their traditional names. They are celebrating traditional rites of passage and so many other traditions which are not Christian. And surprisingly, some of the churches are not against that. They're supporting that. But some churches, as they did 100 years ago, are very much against that. So I think I'm persuaded to believe that we are not totally abandoning our traditional societies. I think they are parallel with Christianity, but maybe with the time we shall find out who wins.
All right, I'd like to go back to you, Maliba. Now, this particular time of the year, you see, even with the economy being the way it is in many parts of the African continent, we still see a lot of people spend, astronomically. You said something about people working all the way from January, all through to November, only to burn it all up in December and then end up maybe in debt in January again. Do you see, number one, my question is, would you say people still maintain that kind of attitude? I mean, given the economic realities right now, particularly in recent years, post-COVID?
I lost you a little bit. Somehow the internet hanged. Can you still hear me?
Okay, I can hear you. I was talking about people making so much money from January all the way till, November, only to go on, spending spree in December and then end up in debt, in January. That used to be some sort of culture, pre-COVID. But post-COVID, would you say that is still what it is?
Well, they say all habits die hard. We still have got the challenge of people burning it up in December, going huge. In December in this country, for most people, you go big or don't go at all. So once we've come out of December, then of course, January becomes so difficult. In this country, of course, January is synonymous with the hard times. It's synonymous with the drought. Of course, drought in the pocket, lack. But then, of course, we spend high in December without care or having any care for how January will look like. That's when then, of course, January comes in and it comes in with its own challenges around school fees, a lot of bills fall due then. And even for those who've traveled up country, you are expected to pay your rent when you come back. And January, of course, is quite capital intensive. And this time on essentials, but then December is also capital intensive, purely out of pressure and how things work around. So that culture still is on, hasn't changed. We will be having memes and jokes going around in a week or so about how difficult January is. Around here, there's always a joke that January has got 60 days. It doesn't have 30 days like any other, because somehow it takes so long before you see your February salary. So it's a cycle. It's one of those things we've taken up. So a few people, other people know how to manage their affairs and resources, but it's still a joke that in January is quite long. So when you are on that 15th of January, you will see guys talking about this is day 45 of January and such. It's quite a long month out of how we actually deal with December.
All right. Now, I would, of course, my next question will go to Dr. Iraki, and this time around, I'll be focusing a bit on Kenya, talking about Kenya being some sort of tourist destination, particularly at this time of the year. I have quite a number of friends who plan to actually go visit Kenya, as part of the celebrations because of the, will I call it, the visa policy around the country, and also the fact that it's also a tourist destination. Are you seeing a lot of tourists around, particularly at this time of the year?
Now, maybe before I answer that question, I need to specify that we seem to be creating an impression that it is only in Africa where people celebrate Christmas and spend money. A lot of companies in the West, Europe and US, will tell you that they make about 50% of their profit around this season. So spending around Christmas is not something African, it is something universal. We have simply commercialized that particular festival. But back to your question, one of the things I've noted when I drive around Nairobi or sit in Nairobi high-end malls and hotels is that it seems Nairobi has suddenly become very brown. You find a lot of Europeans, a lot of Asians sitting around Nairobi restaurants and so on. And that is to explain that tourism is doing very well around this season. And one reason is a lot of people have relatives in Kenya. A lot of Kenyans have their brothers and sisters in the diaspora, and they come around this time. The fact that it is winter in the Northern Hemisphere, in Europe and the US, makes it very conducive for people to come and visit this country during the festive season. So from my observation on the street of Nairobi, restaurants and other places, golf courses and so on, I can tell you a lot of tourists have come visiting here. Some of them, I suspect, have homes here, they have relatives here, but they seem to be enjoying themselves because the weather is very pleasant. And the fact that the Kenyan shilling is weak makes it very easy for tourists to come and visit.
You said the fact that the Kenyan shilling is weak also makes it a sort of tourist attraction. But won't you also say that to a very large extent, tourism too is improving or impacting positively on the economy and thereby building the strength of the currency?
I think one of the things we look forward to, which is very, very important, is that we want to have as many tourists as possible so that they bring their dollars, they bring their euros, they bring their foreign currencies. So that's one thing that would make our currency very strong. The demand for shillings will go up as they convert their currency from their hard currency to the Kenyan shilling. So we look forward to having more tourists. But I was simply saying that when the shilling is weak, some people feel like coming to Kenya because to take advantage of that. In fact, there was a story in the Kenyan newspaper yesterday how Ugandans are flocking to Kenya to come and buy things for Christmas because of the weak Kenyan shilling. So it is two-way.
All right. I'd like to also ask Maliba the same question. I mean, the Kenyan shilling being, the strength of the Kenyan shilling being an attraction for tourists. Do you also see that happening, this period in Kenya?
Well, first of all, I don't think that Kenya primarily becomes attractive or has become attractive, or the new wave we see is you can actually peg that on the shilling. That's dependent on how you look at it. But largely, Kenya has got about 5 what I would call climatic zones. From the coast on the other end to the tropical weather in the west, 5 different zones within a country. It's quite rich in flora and fauna, and there's so much to actually see in Kenya. But then Kenya largely, specifically Nairobi, remains, of course, there's been a joke around the line that Nairobi remains, sometimes it feels like the headquarters of Africa, not just because the UN has got 2 global headquarters here, but because, of course, it's quite strategic in a way. And over the times, of course, the networks and how the regional economies look like, Nairobi remains quite attractive. But then there's that small thing we always don't talk about when we are on shows like this. When you look at, there's the larger story of evolution, and then, of course, we come back to the out of Africa theory. By and large, there is a conclusion amongst anthropologists and so many historians, you can check out that here in Kenya, and the president has been speaking a lot about Kenya being the home of mankind, that if you speak about when man started his journey as a human being, he started around here. And so even by lifting the visa, doing away with the difficult visa processes, the president, of course, was pitching the idea that you cannot stop a man from going home. So largely, when the rest of the people want to come to Nairobi, it's not just about the diversity of the ecosystem, what you can actually see. It's not just about its strategic level, or rather its strategic placement, but it's also the desire of human beings to come back home. So every time you come back to Nairobi, you are coming back to Kenya, you are coming home. This is where all of us began our journey before we spread to the rest of the world.
Now, let's talk about, of course, staying... Of course, still staying on, of course... Okay, did you want to add to what you said? Or
No,
react to it? Okay, you want to react to it, Dr. Iraki?
Yes, because I'm finding this conversation about Kenya being the home of Madka very fascinating. For a very simple reason. Kenya is a very religious country.
Okay.
How do you believe in evolution and Christianity at the same time? That is contradictory. You cannot believe in evolution and believe in religion at the same time.
Well, some have the ability to balance both and still maintain what I call it sanity. But that would move me to my next question, which is religion. Now, Africa is heavily religious. I mean, this time of the year, we know what goes around. You go to different countries, particularly within Africa. There is, of course, the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. On every street, you'll find about 2 to 3 churches. But at the end of the day, you still ask yourself, if you put this pari passu, the economy, the amount of businesses thriving and all of that, they don't seem to match. So, I mean, how do we as Africans balance religion and, number one, humanity, and also the fact that we also need to boost our economy? I'd like to start off with you, Dr. Iraki.
That's a very interesting and very hard question, because that's a question everybody asks. Africa is not religious just during Christmas. We are religious throughout. Anytime I'm going to the office in the morning, I always find some people in church at around 6:30 in the morning. Around lunchtime, there are some people in church. In the evening, there are some people in the church. So we are very religious. And one of the questions that nobody wants to ask around is the role of religion in economic growth. Remember, at the end of the day, economic growth is about people working, people sweating, people doing real work. But religion is about faith. So what we need to do is to balance faith and reality on the ground. And one of the things that I've always advocated we need to have in Africa is the Protestant work ethics. US has grown to what it is today because of Protestant work ethics. People believing that work is godly, that should work for a living. But in Africa, we are very religious, but people don't believe in work. If they believe in work, there'll be less corruption. And if there was less corruption, there will be faster economic growth. So I think at the time we balance the religion with economic reality, productivity, efficiency, and making sure that people get paid for the work done, not because they are present or they are there. So I think there's a need for a change in the region as far as Africa is concerned. Whether I'm in West Africa, whether I'm in South Africa, region is very prominent. But that region, that belief in spirit or in whatever people believe in, should also be translated into economic well-being, so that people don't just pray, people don't just preach, but also do your work, productive economic work, whose effects we see in the rising standards of living.
I'd like to also know, of course, Maliba's opinion on this. People rather, I mean, quite a number of people in Africa would rather pray, profusely than maybe do the work. At the end of the day, you find out that, in many countries, you see more churches than even companies. I mean, what's the mismatch here?
I don't
what's the missing link?
There's a mismatch there. There is not a mismatch as such, because the people who should be opening up factories and other places of work are not the ones who open up churches. Those who open up churches are preachers. So it's not a mismatch as such, because do we have a vibrant economy that can absorb all those people? But before we actually rush into mischaracterizing this, or rather the phenomenon, to feel like Africa doesn't really value work, let's also speak about how Christianity or religion really looks at work. Both for the Christian faith and the Islamic faith, there is overemphasis on work. They speak about work repeatedly. So it's not true that when you escape into either, you are going to not hear about work as such. So Christianity specifically has got quite emphasis on the virtue of work. Work ennobles a man, work gives you a purpose. We are in here to be stewards and we work towards an end, as in we are here to work, we are here for work. Somehow, that is the base upon which Christianity is actually largely founded, dogma and doctrine aside. But then we have got, of course, the challenge of where I've heard that said in Nairobi largely that factories are closing up and then those go-downs are changed into churches. The question is that why is it that many people are finding solace in church? Somehow, the economic realities have it that people do not so much believe in meritocracy. That somehow, if I work hard, if I go all out, I'll find opportunities out there. So we are, of course, made to believe that you have to look for spiritual backup before probably you are able to get a job, before you are able to actually become prosperous in your business. So many people, very many people in church are trying to balance that. That is why, for example, the prosperity gospel, if I'm allowed to call that, is actually quite out there that you go and work, bring whatever you have, and somehow it will work out. So people are trying to work out that, and Christians in and of themselves are actually trying to balance that out. It's a difficult question here, yes, a difficult situation, but for quite, again, differently, there is a number of people who, for them, religion is a coping mechanism for hard economic times. So what then do you choose? Do you choose to get into crime, get into the other side of the law, or probably trust in God and hope that along the way things are going to get better? So it's both a coping mechanism. On the other side, of course, in church, there's emphasis on work. So it's quite a difficult question. But then I think it's a question that politicians really need to look at boldly. We need to have a conversation about it as a society, that why are churches prospering, but businesses are not doing so well? Why is the church one of the most sustainable business models? That if you want to make it big, opening church is one of those sure bets, so long as you can actually do the act properly.
Interesting. The word you used, you said do the act properly. But I wish we could, of course, continue on this particular conversation. But we need to, of course, go on this first half of the show right now. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. XN Iraki, Associate Professor, University of Nairobi, and Maliba Arnold, Public Policy Analyst from Kenya. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Happy
All right.
holidays.
And once again, compliments of the season. Well, we'll go on a quick break. When we return this time around, we will be settling in Nigeria, where we will be looking at the rising cost of living and its toll on Christmas. Of course, stay with us. We'll be right back.